Hello, Life Goddess. How are you today? On today's podcast recording, we are talking about this thin line that our Love Goddess lives on. And the thin line is between the reality and the fantasy world. And you already know that through the Love Goddess Academy, we are teaching women to just have this full-on transformation of themselves and create the relationship and the lifestyle of their best version of themselves and their sexy version of themselves, right? And creating this fantasy element and fantasy aspect to their life. And I want to talk with you ladies on that subject because it is very important. What the hell is fantasy aspect? Why it's important? Why do you want to create? Why, you have to be in the fantasy realm and not in the reality realm, right? So today's conversation is about that. A lot of us women who are busy, mothers, business owners, we work, we come home, there is duties, responsibilities, there is like so much on our plate. And a lot of times, and that's probably why you are even looking into our podcast, is simply because you know that, like, how in the world would you even incorporate the play element when you are in so much stress, in so much busyness, in so much running in your real life that you think you don't even have time for play, for that love goddess element in your own life. So I'm here to break that myth and tell you that if you are following the Love Goddess path, you will learn to stop being in this constant stress busy mode and learn to get connected to the authentic version work of who you are through meditation, or I call it Love Goddess practice every morning, right? You get grounded, you calm yourself down, and then you'll start seeing what's important. When you're in a busy mind and busy, you can't see. Everything is like one big pile of things that's coming to you, and you're just stressed all the time. And just coming onto you, and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to have time for everything? And you are in the spinning mode where you didn't even take a look what's coming to you. And maybe it's like an email that you need to write that's like pushing you through the edge, and you're like, that's going to take 5 minutes, and you are making this big drama out of. And so when you are like, okay, stop the drama, go into like Love Goddess is never going to get overwhelmed. That's just not allowed. And you're going to connect to what's important. You're going to dump all of the things on paper. You're going to see things for what they are. You're going to ground yourself and start prioritizing your list, right? What's important with your real life. And that's when you're going to discover that not only Love Goddess practice is giving you so much peace, it's giving you so much time to honor yourself, it's giving you opportunity to connect to the authentic version of yourself. It's giving you the container of creating the time for play, so you balance it out with the play, not just work and busyness and all that nonsense that you are spinning about. It's about the play and fun in your own life, in your own environment and in your own lifestyle that you are creating. And you're creating this most amazing lifestyle to live the life of your dreams, to become the Love Goddess, to really start following that path that you are really meant to follow as a woman on this earth, right? And connecting to the important aspects of who you are, right? And why did I say in the beginning that Love Goddess lives in the worlds between the reality and the fantasy? Because while that spinning is happening in the reality, you really want to create aspect of the fantasy world where you get to play with your inner child, you get to play with your inner love goddess, you get to create amazing sex life with your partner. You get to become the full woman that you are meant to become, right? You get to live in a fantasy world where you get to create your reality. You get to connect to that new life that you know you want, and you're going to connect to the clarity of that new life and what it's going to do for you and how it's going to look for you. And you get to create that fantasy element for your sex life, but also that fantasy element for your dream life. Why are you getting up in the morning every morning? Like, why are you working so hard? Why are you doing certain things in life that you're doing? You get to connect to the fantasy element. In so many aspects. So what is fantasy element? Fantasy element is your sex life that you are also prioritizing. And it's creating this almost like a playful archetype where you get to embody that archetype and play it out in your sex life, because sex is nothing but imagination. And the more imagination you have, the sexier your life is gonna get. It's imagination, creativity, also connected to our sacral chakra, right? For a reason. And sacral chakra is all about playfulness, imagination, creativity, really bringing our talents to the world. It's about really being connected to our creative force. Also, you create kids through your sacral chakra, so everything comes full circle. It makes sense, right? So when you are in your imagination space for sex, sex becomes not a mundane thing you do on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It becomes this anticipated playtime that you get to indulge as a new archetype, as a new game. It's your playtime for both of you that both of you enjoy, anticipate, create, and plan for, right? That's your fantasy element that allows you to escape the reality, of things, right? But also fantasy is also this new world that you are creating yourself. First, you have to create it in your energy first. Remember how we talked about morning practice and how we intentionally create our own life, our destiny, our own reality, and we do this through morning visualization practice. And the way you create that life is through creating the fantasy version of that, the daydreaming version of that, and start believing that this is true, and moving it from that energetic space of fantasy into the reality space, right? And so you also create that life in the energy space first before it can become your reality. You always create in the energy first, and then it comes to fruition through manifestation, right? Fantasy world is this world where you are disconnected from your reality. Your reality always going to bring you triggers, and there will be people who are unhappy, who complain, and things going to happen. And if you keep paying attention to the negative stuff in your life and responding to triggers, you're going to mess up the energy of the fantasy, and your amazing life that you're creating is not going to come to fruition, right? So it's about tuning off and turning off all the triggers and putting your attention away from these triggers into your fantasy element, into your fantasy life that you daydreamed about, because that's what makes you feel good. And remember, the key to manifestation is feeling good. So when you direct your attention from something that doesn't feel good to something that feels good, and the way you're going to do that is connecting back to your dreams, to your desires, to why you do this, to your big purpose, to your whole entire goal, you get clarity on that fantasy element, and you connect to that fantasy daydreaming state, and it feels good. And by feeling good is what you release your resistance to manifestation, and you allow whatever the forces in the universe to unfold certain things for you. But your only job is connecting to what feels good, and your fantasy always gonna feel good. It always gonna feel good. That's the whole point. Your daydreaming imagination. I used to daydream in school so much, and I'm like, how do people not daydream, right? And so I've been a big daydreamer ever since. And so I am your most competent person to teach you daydreaming, right? If it was a science, you want to disconnect from your logical mind and all the triggers and the reality that you perceive. You might perceive it wrong or right or whatnot. You disconnect from that. You stop your resistance, then you connect to your fantasy element. And fantasy element is your future big life that you're creating. You may be creating the fantasy archetype of yourself that you are feeling so much within you that it becomes you, right? You're creating your life, your grid to be manifested through that fantasy element. That is why I teach you the Love Goddess principle. She lives on the thin edge between the reality because she's able to embody the fantasy aspect of it into the real life, whether for good or temporarily. But she lives on that edge of fantasy and reality. However, she's leaning more into the fantasy world in order to have that fun, have that imagination, create that sex life too. Like the play out all sorts of, like, you play out different role plays, whether in bed, whether in life. Like you can dress up as like someone else and go to the bar. Nobody's gonna recognize you, and it's fun simply because it's fun, right? Like you live out that fantasy aspect that because it feels good and it brings you joy and there's no other reasons needed. And by focusing on what feels good, you're releasing your resistance and a lot of better other things that are there in the grid are coming to fruition in your real life. But your only job is to focus on what feels good, daydream, manifest, and you really stop that resistance element into both of these worlds are connected. Like you can't say, hey, one is fantasy and one is not, simply because one is energy world that you can't see, but it is just as real. And we humans are guilty for thinking that it's not. That fantasy world, I call it fantasy because so you can understand it, but it's that energy world, that's the grid you're creating, that's just as real as your real world. And I refer to this as more of a feminine energy, where this is more of a masculine energy, right? And with that, my love, live more in the fantasy world and create that life through that fantasy world that brings you joy, fun, creativity, imagination, and play.